If you were to read Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 5, you'll encounter let's say, an odd passage. When people began to multiply on the face of the ground, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that they were fair, and they took wives for themselves of all that they chose. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went into the daughters of humans, who bore children to them. These were the heroes that were of old, warriors of renown. What's going on here? The story is so ambiguous, so obscure, so weird. It has inspired thousands of years of creative interpretation within both Judaism and Christianity. Who were these sons of God? And who were these Nephilim? Enormous giants? Ancient demons? Fallen angels? One Hebrew Bible scholar says the passage is a swarm of extremely rare words and phrases with atypical and ambiguous grammar. So, all the respect in the world to the Hebrew Bible scholars who've needed to translate this passage, the unsung heroes of old within biblical studies. But even this is ambiguous. Technically, the text simply says that the Nephilim were on the earth in those days when the sons of God and women were getting it on. So it doesn't explicitly equate the Nephilim with their offspring. But very early on in history, interpreters of this passage do assume that the children of the sons of God, the Nephilim, and the heroes of old are all one and the same. The majority of scholarly commentaries on this passage also assume this. The sons of God, or the B'nai Elohim in Hebrew, refers to a heavenly council of divine beings surrounding the God of Israel, God's entourage. They make a few appearances throughout the Hebrew Bible. We can find parallels to these sons of God in the broader world of Canaanite religion. The chief god in the Canaanite pantheon was El, and the children of El make a few appearances as a divine assembly in texts discovered in the city of Ugarit in modern-day Syria. In these texts, they're called a council of those in heaven, sitting on elevated thrones, but they're lesser divine beings, not quite at the power level of El. Later Phoenician inscriptions from the 8th and 7th centuries BCE also refer to a council of the children of El. As with so much of Israelite religion, the B'nai Elohim of Genesis seem to be rooted in the wider religious landscape of the region. This would make the Nephilim some sort of semi-divine beings. Many scholars equate them with Gilgamesh in ancient Mesopotamian mythology. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, Gilgamesh is described as the son of a goddess and a human father, and he's described as 2/3 god and 1/3 human. This connection is made stronger by the fact that these Nephilim are also described as heroes of old, warriors of renown, Gilgamesh being a quintessential example of an ancient Near Eastern semi-divine hero. The word Nephilim itself can also shed some light on these beings. This Hebrew word has the same root as the verb to fall. So scholars think we should translate Nephilim as the fallen or the fallen ones. But fallen in what sense? Fallen from heaven, as in they descended from a supernatural realm of existence? Fallen in a moral sense, as in distanced from divine grace? Or fallen simply as dead, or fallen in battle? It's ambiguous, but several of the scholars I read while researching this video assume that the last option is the most likely option, fallen as in killed or destroyed. Elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible, fallen one refers to those fallen in battle, like 2 Samuel 1:19, how the warriors have fallen, or Ezekiel 32:27, and they do not lie with the fallen warriors of long ago. This again makes sense considering that they're described as heroes of old, warriors of renown. But that's about all we can learn from this passage. It's very possible that the passage contains so little because the original intended audience already knew about these beings, and so there was no real need to elaborate further. But luckily the Nephilim do occur one other time in the Hebrew Bible that sheds some light on how these beings were conceptualized by their earliest audience. They appear in Numbers chapter 13. So the backstory here is that the Israelites have escaped from slavery in Egypt, received God's law through Moses on Mount Sinai, and then started to spy out the land promised to their ancestors as they prepared to conquer it. Out of a group of 12 spies, one from each tribe, only 2 bring back a hopeful report, but the rest of the spies saw something scary. All the people that we saw in it are of great size. There we saw the Nephilim. The Anakites come from the Nephilim, and to ourselves we seemed like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them. Here the Nephilim are linked with humans of unusually large size, and of a known ancestry, the sons of Anak. This race of men is so enormous, so strong, that any attempt by the Hebrews to conquer the land would result in being squished like a bug. Again, the passage is ambiguous. On one hand, we could interpret the spies' report as performative exaggeration, hyperbole to cover up their military cowardice, or it could be taken as a legit claim that an ancient lineage of giants lived in southern Canaan. How they would have survived the flood is anyone's guess. The authors of the Hebrew Bible don't care to elaborate. But what we can gather is that the Nephilim were thought to be very large humans, or very large human-like semi-divine beings whose lineage survives in this people called the sons of Anak. Hints that the ancient Israelites believed in a race of giants indigenous to the land of Canaan are sprinkled throughout the Hebrew Bible, but they're not always called the Nephilim. Amos chapter 2 describes the God of Israel destroying the Amorites, whose height is like the height of cedars, and whose strength is like oaks. Many scholars believe that the text is not mere hyperbole, but a claim about the existence of giants. Deuteronomy chapter 2 mentions a few tribes of unusually large people called the Rephaim. The text says, like the Anakim, they are usually reckoned as Rephaim, though the Moabites call them Emim. Deuteronomy chapter 3 also mentions a King Og of Bashan, a guy with a really big bed. Now, only King Og of Bashan was left of the remnant of the Rephaim. Some scholars have proposed that this belief emerged from the Israelites observing the ruins of giant architecture in the landscape. Thousands of huge Bronze Age burial chambers called dolmens can be found across the region. Also, Bronze Age Canaanite cities were monumental, built out of huge stones. Just as an example, the scholar Ron Hendel compares a humble Israelite house to the huge Middle Bronze Age fortifications of the ancient city of Hebron. Currently, they're 18 feet tall, and they were definitely taller thousands of years ago. As the argument goes, some Israelites must have looked back at these fortifications that predated them by hundreds of years and thought, well, a long-lost race of giants must have built these. Maybe it's not a coincidence that so many references to giants also refer to their fortified cities. Deuteronomy chapter 1 says it's a people greater and taller than us, and great cities fortified up to heaven. Dr. Hendel argues that the term Nephilim resonates with this idea that Israelites were looking at abandoned Canaanite ruins. Nephilim, the fallen ones, a civilization now lost. And speaking of giants, when the Hebrew scriptures were first collectively translated into Greek in what's called the Septuagint Bible, in both of these passages, the word Nephilim was translated as gigantes, the giants. These ancient Jewish translators were now living in a Hellenized world. They spoke Greek, they participated in Greek culture, and they must have known and read Greek literature. To them, the Nephilim apparently reminded them of the giants of Greek mythology. Going back to the ancient Greek work of Hesiod called the Theogony, the giants were understood to be pre-Olympian divine beings, born from Gaia, or Mother Earth, sprung from the blood of Father Heaven, or Uranus, after he was castrated. Ouch. According to various sources, these giants battled with the Olympian gods, but were destroyed. Some sources equate them with the Titans, who also battled the gods only to lose and be imprisoned in the underworld. Other Greek and Roman authors describe the giants as being punished by the gods and trapped under mountains, where they're responsible for seismic activity and volcanoes. And Greek historians like Herodotus and Plutarch even claimed that the bones of giants had been discovered, leading some modern scholars to argue that these ancient testimonies reflect plausible knowledge of fossils. Now, translation is a tough business. As one scholar says, translators need to find the most appropriate term that evokes a similar set of associations without the need of any additional explanation. So when these Hellenistic Jewish translators encountered the Hebrew word Nephilim, the Greek word giants apparently shared enough traits to result in a good enough translation, a race of big, hybrid divine beings that had been destroyed in centuries past. And throughout the Second Temple period of Jewish history, Jewish authors started to expand the lore surrounding the Nephilim. One of the most notable examples, and probably the earliest example, is First Enoch, a compendium of Jewish apocalyptic literature composed between the 4th century and 1st century BCE, all packaged together into one book. First Enoch begins with a retelling of Genesis known as the Book of the Watchers. Here the Watchers are fallen, rebellious angels who are equated with the sons of God mentioned in Genesis chapter 6. Like in Genesis, they marry human women who give birth to violent, all-consuming offspring called the Nephilim. But while Genesis barely elaborates, First Enoch goes into great detail. saying the women bore great giants, whose heights were 300 cubits, which is around 450 feet or 137 meters. So we're talking Godzilla-sized giants here. Birth is hard enough, so dear God, those poor women. These giant Nephilim have a big appetite. After they consume all of the produce of the land, they turn to eating people. So the giants turned against the people in order to eat them. Eventually, the archangels need to intervene and destroy the giants. Similar stories can be found in the Book of Jubilees and the Book of the Giants, both of which have survived among the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Book of the Giants follows a similar story to the Book of the Watchers, with the giants being a source of evil who are eventually destroyed. Interestingly, one of the giants is named Gilgamesh, so again we see a nod to ancient Near Eastern mythology. But outside of Jewish apocalyptic literature like First Enoch or the Book of the Giants, a very different stream of interpretation about the Nephilim also began to develop, arguing that they are not otherworldly hybrid beings, but this-worldly beings. In other words, humans. In the centuries following the destruction of the Second Temple, Jewish rabbis wrote a bunch of interpretations on the Book of Genesis. And in these works, the sons of God were pictured as young aristocrats who married the daughters of commoners. For example, the rabbinic text called Genesis Rabbah assumes that the sons of God, the fathers of the Nephilim, are humans. But as the scholar Annette Reed says, the real question then becomes, why are they called sons of God? The text says Rabbi Simeon ben Yohai called them the sons of nobles, and cursed all who called them the sons of God, while two other rabbis floated the idea that they're called sons of God because they had long lives without trouble or suffering. Now, many of these rabbis did assume that the sons of God and the Nephilim were very big people. Some might even say giants. Some rabbis even emphasized that primordial humans in general, starting with Adam, were giants, and that human stature declined over the generations. But the rabbis of this era continually reinforced the understanding that they were not subordinate gods, demigods, or the offspring of angels. Even the etymology of Nephilim as the fallen ones did not evoke fallen angels, but simply referred to their destroyed lineage or their fallen morality. Genesis Rabbah says Nephilim denotes that they hurled the world down, themselves fell from the world, and filled the world with abortions through their immorality. The fallen angels interpretation that was so popular in the Book of Enoch seems to have been suppressed during these early centuries of Rabbinic Judaism. Christian interpretations were also mixed. Christian theologians occasionally accepted certain elements of the Nephilim's angelic origin story, while often clearly trying to distance themselves from it too. Ambrose, the bishop of Milan, concedes that the Nephilim were the offspring of angels and women, while Ephraim the Syrian considered them to be real-world descendants of Cain. After all, the Book of Genesis calls them mighty men. St. Augustine interprets the Nephilim as real-world giants who descended from Seth, but eventually became examples of moral failure. Although the angelic interpretation that was so popular in the Book of Enoch subsided in later forms of Judaism and Christianity, it never fully disappeared. The Kabbalistic text called the Zohar, for example, continued to read the Nephilim as fallen angels, and situated them within elaborate cosmologies. So it's clear that the concept of the Nephilim evolved over the centuries, beginning as the mysterious children of lesser gods in the Hebrew Bible, to the children of angels in the Book of Enoch, to the progeny of aristocratic humans in early rabbinic texts. While researching this video, the thing that fascinated me the most is the theory that ancient fossils and Bronze Age structures may have inspired beliefs in an ancient race of giants. When we focus so much on ancient texts like the Book of Genesis, we sometimes forget about the archaeology, and how ancient beliefs and practices were often shaped by the landscape, both natural and human-made. If you're interested in archaeology, I'm excited to recommend a brand new series called Archaeology Quest. It's a head-to-head competition between two science creators to see who would have survived 10,000 years ago. Under the guidance of real archaeologists, they'll learn how to make pottery, assemble and throw their own spears, make stone tools, and hunt and forage for food. Archaeology Quest is a brand new series on the streaming service Nebula. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you've heard me talk about Nebula. I'm a Nebula creator. Here's my Nebula page on screen. I post all of my videos early there, and there are a lot of things I love about this platform. First of all, it's owned by us, the creators. So as a creator-owned and operated platform, when you sign up, you're helping to support us directly, and supporting us in a more stable and viable way than relying only on YouTube AdSense. But another great thing about the platform, Nebula is becoming the home of a bigger and bigger library of amazing original content. Archaeology Quest is just the latest example, but Lindsay Ellis now publishes all of her videos there. Real Life Lore publishes an intense educational series called Modern Conflicts, which explores warfare in the 21st century. So it's worth signing signing up just for the Nebula Originals and what we have in store for 2024. If you'd like to sign up, the best deal is the annual plan, which works out to be $2.50 a month if you use my link. Thanks everyone, link is in the comments below.